In Greenwich, a suburb of New South Wales, Australia, police knocked on the door of number 31 Greendale Street looking for the resident. Local kids called this house the creepy house on the corner. And honestly, I can see why, but they didn't know the half of it. The house had razor wire scattered around the perimeter. It also had homemade alarm systems made with strings and empty cans. In the backyard stood 3 old abandoned classic motorbikes, and this is a little weirder than it sounds too. Nobody had ever seen the owner of the house ever riding them. Outside the house were broken household appliances, old tyres and bags of rubbish. Much of it was overgrown with weeds and bushes. The interior of the house was filled with rubbish and personal belongings too. The hoarding within the property was so severe that it could be seen from above the window level from the outside. But the full extent of the house's contents would be revealed 15 years too late. So yeah, the creepy house on the corner moniker fitted pretty well. The man that lived there did have a name. He was 60-year-old Bruce Andrew Roberts. Bruce was known as kind of weird, but he wasn't a criminal, nor was he involved in illicit substances. He pretty much kept himself to himself. Bruce was born in September of 1956 to parents Athol and Joyce in Coonabarabran. His childhood seemed good. He vacationed in New South Wales when he was a kid pretty regularly. Mother Joyce was from an affluent background, so money was never a concern for the family. He was said to be impressionable though, and his interests in motorcycles and weapons started pretty early. But that didn't make him a bad guy. At some point in his younger years, his parents split up and Bruce stayed with his mother. Some years later, Joyce's mother, Bruce's grandmother, would pass away. This inheritance allowed them to purchase the home at 31 Greendale Street, and there they lived until Mother Joyce sadly passed away in March of 1989, when Bruce was 33 years old. This meant that Bruce inherited $1 million in shares. He was able to buy 31 Greendale Street outright, and he never had to work again. Being set for life, mixed with the loss of his mother, seemed to be a bad mixture for Bruce. As the years passed, Bruce began to collect social security payments, and the condition of the house and the condition of Bruce began to decline. Neighbour Bob Mayer did have some interactions with Bruce. He said that when Bruce would be out in his back garden, he could be heard talking to himself quite vigorously. Bob also said that Bruce would send a Christmas card to him, his wife and his dog, even though the dog had died years earlier. Pretty tragically, sending Christmas cards to neighbours and the occasional letter to a couple of family members and his sister was the only outside contact that he really had. Bruce was described as a bachelor, as childless, as a recluse. However, he would be seen going for one walk almost daily, which would be to the supermarket or pharmacy. On this walk, no matter the weather, he would be seen wearing the same brown coat. But in recent months though, neighbours thought that the man was becoming more paranoid. There was some kind of change in him, but nobody thought too much of it. And then, they stopped seeing him altogether. Perhaps Bruce finally decided that the outside world just wasn't for him, or perhaps something really wasn't right. Those daily walks to the store wearing his brown coat seemed to stop. Bruce's neighbours finally realised they hadn't seen him for a little while. Well, for 8 long weeks. The last sighting was in mid-May of 2017, and then finally the police were alerted on Friday, July the 21st. Bruce would finally receive a welfare check at 12:45 p.m. As we all know here, we shouldn't judge and everyone has a story. And before I go on, I promise you this story is not going the way that you think it is. There is pretty much no way you could guess what happened next inside that house. Police officers knocked on the door of 31 Greendale Street. They got no response. They knocked again, shouting to let Bruce know that they were there. Still, nothing. Silence settled over the house before authorities came to a decision. They would have to force entry. Bang, bang, bang. The double locks used to seal the house shut were torn from the doorframe. The front door flew open and revealed a scene almost impossible to imagine. The level of hoarding in the house far exceeded what was expected. From the floor to almost the ceiling of the home stood towering mounds of boxes, documents, bags, newspapers, luggage and trash. There was a walkway through the hoard that led them from the front door and through the living room. Photo albums found in the house didn't show any pictures of Bruce nor his family or friends. Instead, they were filled with pictures of motorbikes and firearms. But initially, it wasn't what they saw that caused them concern. It was what they could smell. This was a smell that the police and firefighters on scene knew all too well. It was the smell of death. But this time it was mixed with a burning hot stench. Something similar to meat that had been blasted on the barbecue for way too long. Pushing through the narrow pathway, they discovered the cause of the smell. Bruce Roberts was found slumped, half in the corridor and half in the room. His body lay draped over a 2-bar radiant heater. Sadly, Bruce's body was now badly charred. The moisture within the body stopped a fire from starting, a fire that would have very quickly ravaged the tightly packaged house. Bruce Roberts' right hand, shoulder and the right side of his face, his neck, chest, ribcage and internal organs had all been heavily affected by the heat. The body was heavily degraded, being in almost perfect conditions for decomposition. At 6:30 p.m. that same day, Bruce was removed from his beloved creepy house on the corner. However, this is just the start of the story. You've got to believe me. Honestly, it doesn't get any less tragic from here on out. In fact, it gets unbelievably worse. An investigation into the man's demise showed that in his final week, he visited the doctor. He had been having some issues with chest pains. Presumably, this was what led to his final moments, perhaps instantly keeling over and dropping down onto the heater. However, the state that he was discovered in meant that the coroner could never 100% confirm this. So, the house then sat silently and unoccupied for the rest of the year. It took that long for his family to realise that he was no longer in the land of the living. As Christmas rolled around, Bruce's Uncle John and Auntie Norma didn't receive their normal festive letter, and after some probing, they discovered the fate of their nephew. As we know, Bruce had received a decent windfall from his mother and his home was paid off in full. The home, and indeed the land it was built on, had appreciated heavily in value over the years, and therefore the estate of over $600,000 was left to be split between his family and 2 charities. This meant that the mammoth task of clearing the hoard fell on those that Bruce left behind. David Alexander, his solicitor, put in motion a team of professional cleaners to take on the task. By May the 15th of 2018, the process was now underway, but disturbingly it revealed illegally owned firearms and a stockpile of ammunition. This was confiscated and destroyed by authorities. Australia has had pretty strict gun laws in place since 1996, a move that almost eliminated gun-related deaths from the nation. However, this discovery was nothing compared to what was found just a few days later. On May the 29th, 2018, the cleaners had worked their way through much of the house. They worked one room at a time, and now they hit bedroom 2. Just inside the room to the right of the door, there was a rug. It was rolled and folded on top of itself in a pile. Underneath this rug, with its back sat against a sofa, slumped to the left, was the dried and decayed body of a man. Police returned to the creepy house on the corner once more, and once more they had to determine what had happened to yet another body. The Sydney Forensic Medicine Department in Lidcombe began their investigation. Immediately obvious was that the left foot was detached from the ankle joint, but that was the least of their concern. It was clear that the man had suffered a blast from a shotgun, the location of which was above the collarbone with scattered pellets in the neck and chest. This was noted as the cause of the man's demise. Amazingly, as the body was described as completely mummified, identifying features such as fingerprints, tattoos, and of course DNA were all intact. Toxicology tests showed signs of illicit stimulants as well as ibuprofen in the body. As test results came back from the lab, so did the name of the mummified man. It was Shane John Snellman, a man that hadn't been seen by his family for 15.5 years. Looking into his history, it soon became clear that Snellman had a long history of criminal activity. The first major legal issue he faced was when he was just 15 years old. He was charged with the murder of a homeless man. However, he was later acquitted. Snellman had, though, served time for substance offences and property theft. In contrast, although generally accepted as a strange recluse, Bruce Roberts had zero criminal history. He wasn't known to use illicit substances, nor was he known to be friends or even acquaintances with the criminal underbelly of Greenwich. Snellman hadn't had the easiest of lives. When he was young, his parents divorced, and then things began to fall apart. He and his sister were placed in a convent school, and then shortly after, at age just 14, Snellman dropped out of the school and then fell into a troubled lifestyle. He had almost constant brushes with the law. Before, in his early 20s, he moved to the Central Coast. There, he lived with his sister and brother-in-law and found work in a slaughterhouse. By 1995, he met a woman and entered a serious relationship, and they moved from town to town over the coming years. In 1999, the relationship broke down. Snellman was now once again in and out of prison. This was mainly for theft and illicit substance-related incidents. And then in 2002, he was released from prison for what would be the final time. He was very much on hard times, his social and substance workers saying that he was very thin. They believed he was probably using stimulants and was stuck in that lifestyle once again. He received a disability payment every 2 weeks, and he was in the routine of withdrawing that money as soon as it hit his account. What he did with that money, we can only assume, perhaps unfairly. However, on the 23rd of October 2002, that money went into his account, but it never came out. His partner from 1995, with whom he was still in contact with, stopped hearing from him at this same time. She decided to contact the police and report him as missing. The case, though, could barely even get started. Snellman just vanished. Nothing more was seen or heard of him until Bruce Roberts' home was being cleared. So how did he get there? When did he draw his final breath? The coroner on the case, Deputy Derek Lee, unwound a tangled web that left 2 bodies 15 years and just 15 feet apart. He believed that Snellman broke into Bruce's home. The chances of him being invited would be very slim. Remember, Bruce was a recluse by choice. And no, I didn't mean that to rhyme. Snellman was no stranger to theft, and he had an active habit to fund. So once inside the home, an altercation must have occurred. Snellman was not to know that the home contained an air rifle, 3 shotguns, 6 bolt-action rifles, 3 self-loading rifles, ammo belts, and crates of ammunition. I think it's safe to assume if he knew those weapons were there, he'd probably have stayed out. The investigation showed that a shotgun was fired in the home, and that the projectile hit Snellman. He drew his final breath, and there he sat for 15 years. Bruce tried to cover up what had happened with a rug, a body entombed by boxes of belongings and trash, along with over 60 air fresheners. To me, it seems like Bruce just wanted to forget that this had ever happened. It's almost impossible to imagine sharing your home with a body for 15 years. But that is exactly what Bruce Roberts chose to do. Had he gone to the police there and then, who knows what would have happened? Instead, he chose to go within himself. It seems that Bruce became even more recluse, more paranoid, further from reality, and deeper into his own world. And then one day, his heart just stopped. And maybe he felt a moment of relief. His secret was either going to come out and lift that weight from his conscience, or he was no longer going to be around to face the consequences of what he had done all those years before, taking his secret to the grave. The fact is, we will never know.